So I think that Abraham Heschel's greatest contribution as a theologian, as a thinker, was to come to teach us that we know God through experience or through encounter. In other words, not the medieval attempt to prove God by reason, which was still very popular, or for that matter, the early modern trying to prove God as the great watchmaker, the great, by the argument from nature and design, the God who sets the world in motion, kind of thing. Rather, to him, this is the wrong way. God is encountered in the depth of life. Religion itself is a way of living. It's an experience of existence. It's not just an intellectual or a legal or any other kind of construction. So the truth is, he taught us, that's another thing he taught, you experience life, you experience the world with what he called radical amazement, meaning you see the wonder, you don't take it for granted. It's not routine physical. If you experience it with radical amazement, then you will see many phenomena that are sacred and holy, and many moments that you will encounter God. In fact, much of his writing was sort of less intellectually structured and more like poetry, designed to give you the flavor and the feeling of a religion and of encounter God, not just talk about it. And of course, I believe to do that and that whole emphasis really reflected his own Hasidic background, very rich Hasidic background. He lived it, he grew up in it, smich in it, and never turned his back on it, even though he lived in a modern and post-Hasidic society. The quote I would like to share, the quote from him that I'd like to share with you: the road to the sacred leads through the secular. And what I think he means by that is two things. Again, first of all, that religion is in the depth of life. And therefore, when they say the road to the sacred, nature, a sunrise, a sunset, a starry night, magnificent, waves of the ocean and so on. In nature, one experiences, it seems to be secular activity, but it's not. If you experience it with amazement, you experience the God who underlies it and who has created it. And not just in nature, I would say, in human, if you study the biological human systems, they're amazing, they're wonders. Or for that matter, in great music or great art, one can encounter, one is filled with the love and embrace of life, and in that moment, one can also encounter God. So the so-called secular activity is one of the best ways of coming. There's not going to a formal place set aside at shul, but going to see these kinds of experiences. And if you open to those experiences, don't live them superficially, you will encounter God. The second way he means that the secular leads to the sacred, I think, was his point that the Torah is not just about God and worship of God, it's about Enodum L'Chavero. It's got a very strong component of Mishpat Tzedakah, meaning justice and righteousness. It's got a very strong emphasis on social justice, helping the poor, helping the oppressed, helping the outsider, the ger, the vulnerable. And of course, he felt this very strong and practiced it. And as well known, his strong support for the civil rights movement in the 60s. He marched with Martin Luther King, showing strong support for him. And that support, the famous march from Selma to Montgomery, a march which I believe Rabbi Saul Berman also participated in. He in that famous march, he once said that the march itself was a form of prayer. In fact, it has this wonderful line: when I walked in Selma, I felt like my legs were praying. And in a way, it's Kol Atzmo Sai Tomarna, Hashem Kamocha. All my limbs declare God who is like you, God's presence in life. In this case, the limbs that were walking and working for justice were also connecting us to God. So I would close with one other comment. So I'm so proud and happy that LYCT is sponsoring this encounter with Abraham Heschel. In my generation, and I regret to say this, many Orthodox Jews avoided him as part of that sectarian Haredization process because he was a professor at Jewish Theological Seminary, which is a conservative rabbinic seminary. But Heschel himself was completely observant, completely shomer mitzvah, completely God intoxicated and committed. He was teaching people to observe. He was teaching people to live the religious life. So the point is, the Torah, his Torah, transcends denomination. And for that matter, YCT's Torah, and that's part of its greatness, transcends denomination. And therefore reaches out and is proud to learn from every Jew who embraces the whole Torah and exemplifies it, particularly a person of Heschel's caliber. So I think it's very important that we show that our Torah includes the whole Jewish people and not just a narrow sectarian version of Orthodoxy. I'll close with a quote from him, nevertheless, if I can. Again, capturing this combination. A religious man, he says, is one who holds God and man in one thought at one time, but at all times. One who suffers harm done to others. One whose greatest passion is compassion, whose greatest strength is love and defiance of despair.